The radar blip wasn't following any flight path I'd seen before. I leaned closer to my monitor. Tapping the screen like that would somehow make the reading make sense. The contact was moving at speeds that should have torn any conventional aircraft apart, zigzagging across Nevada airspace like physics meant nothing to it. "Control, this is Radar Station 3, I said into my headset. "I've got an unidentified contact bearing 045, altitude varying between 15 and 30,000 feet. Speed is..." I double-checked the readout. "Speed appears to be in excess of Mach 5. The response came back immediately. "Station 3, confirm your last. Did you say Mach 5? "That's affirmative, Control, and it's accelerating." My fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to track the object's strange path. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't acting like any aircraft in our database, military, civilian, or experimental. The computer kept trying to classify it, cycling through every known profile before giving up and labeling it simply as unknown. Through the strengthened window of my monitoring station, I could see the flight line coming alive. Ground crews were already running toward the ready fighters, and within minutes, 2 FA-18 Hornets were taxiing toward the runway. Their afterburners lit up the desert morning as they launched, climbing hard to intercept. I tracked both the fighters and the unknown contact on my screen, watching the distance between them shrink. The Hornets were pushing their engines to the limit, but the unidentified craft moved like they were standing still. It would slow down, almost like it was letting them catch up, then dart away at impossible angles that would have turned any human pilot to liquid. "Viper 1 has visual," crackled through the radio. "Control, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's metallic, maybe 40 feet long, no visible wings or control surfaces. No engine exhaust that I can see." The pilot's voice had that edge I recognized, the sound of training colliding with something that training never prepared you for. I'd heard it before during classified tests, but never quite like this. "Viper 1, attempt to establish..." The transmission cut off as my screen erupted in alarm warnings. The unknown contact had suddenly turned around, speeding straight up before entering what looked like an uncontrolled dive. The altitude numbers on my display were dropping so fast they blurred together. "It's going down!" Viper 1's voice burst through the static. "Northeast of the base, maybe 12 miles out. It's not pulling up." The contact disappeared from my screen. 1 second it was there, falling toward the desert floor. And the next, nothing. Just empty air where something impossible had been seconds before. I was already grabbing my field jacket when Robert Miller's voice came through the station's intercom. "Anderson, Thompson, Williams, recovery team, ready room, 5 minutes, full hazmat protocols." The ready room was organized chaos when I arrived. Robert stood at the center, somehow managing to look calm while giving orders to the people around him. David Thompson was already there, checking his tactical gear with the careful attention that made him so good at perimeter security. Sarah Williams rushed in moments after me, her equipment cases making noise as she set them down. "Listen up," Robert said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We've got a downed craft of unknown origin 12 miles northeast. Crash site is hot. I want nobody approaching without full protective gear. Thompson, you're on perimeter. Nobody gets within 100 yards who isn't on my list. Anderson, you're with me on initial assessment. Williams, I want you ready to move in the second we confirm it's safe." We loaded into 3 vehicles, 2 heavily armored Humvees and Sarah's mobile lab unit. I rode in the lead vehicle with Robert, watching the desert blur past as we pushed the Humvee to its limits. The radio chatter from the fighter pilots played through the speakers, their confusion obvious as they circled the crash site from above. "Visual on the impact zone," our driver called out, pointing ahead. Even from a mile away, I could see the scar in the desert where the craft had come down. It had carved a long furrow through the sandy soil, throwing up berms on either side like a boat's wake frozen in earth. But where I expected to see twisted metal and fire, there was something else entirely. The craft sat at the end of the impact trail, largely intact. Its hull was a seamless, silver-gray metal that seemed to change color as we got closer, like oil on water. The entire surface was glowing with a soft, pulsing light that had nothing to do with heat. My temperature readings showed it was actually cooler than the surrounding desert air. "Perimeter secure," David's voice came through the radio as his team spread out in a wide circle around the crash site. No radiation detected, no chemical signatures. Whatever powered this thing, it's not nuclear. Robert and I walked up slowly, our boots crunching on the glass-smooth sand that had been melted by the craft's path. Up close, the ship was even stranger. No seams, no rivets, no visible way to get inside. Just that flowing, organic metal that looked more grown than built. "There," I said, pointing to a section of the hull that was slightly different, a rectangular outline barely visible against the strange metal. Robert nodded and pointed for the entry team. Two specialists moved forward with cutting tools, but before they could touch the hull, the outlined section simply opened. Not like a door swinging or sliding, but like the metal itself was flowing aside, creating an entrance where solid hull had been moments before. The interior was lit by the same soft light as the hull, revealing a space that seemed too large for the craft's exterior dimensions. Everything was curves and flowing lines, with no sharp angles anywhere. In the center, held in what looked like a form-fitting chair, was the pilot. Human. Completely, impossibly human. He was unconscious, breathing steadily. Male, maybe 30 years old, with features that could have belonged to anyone you'd pass on the street. But his clothing, that was something else. It looked like a single piece. No visible seams or fasteners, made from a material that seemed to change between fabric and something more like liquid mercury. "Get him out of there," Robert ordered. "Careful, we don't know what we're dealing with." I helped the medical team ease the figure onto a stretcher. As we lifted him, my gloved hand brushed against his exposed skin, and I felt a strange tingling, like static electricity, but different. His skin had an odd quality to it, almost glowing, as if there was light moving just beneath the surface. "Vital signs are strong," one of the medics reported. "Pulse steady at 60, respiration normal, no visible trauma." That made no sense. The craft had hit the desert floor at speeds that should have turned anyone inside into paste. But this man didn't have a scratch on him. Even his strange clothing was undamaged. Sarah had arrived with her equipment and was taking readings of both the craft and its occupant. Her usual scientific calm was cracking slightly. I could see it in the way she kept adjusting her glasses and rechecking her instruments. "These readings can't be right," she muttered, running her scanner over the unconscious figure again. "The cellular activity levels are off the charts, but the patterns are... they're human, but not. It's like looking at a familiar picture through a kaleidoscope." "Secure everything," Robert commanded. "I want the craft loaded for transport within the hour. Use the heavy lifter. I don't care if it's overkill. And our guest here goes in the isolation unit until we know what we're dealing with." The next 2 hours were controlled chaos as the recovery team worked to extract the craft. It was lighter than it looked, which raised even more questions about what it was made of. The unconscious pilot was transferred to a specially equipped medical transport, with Sarah staying nearby, taking constant readings. I rode back to base in the medical transport, keeping watch over our strange visitor. He never moved, never showed any sign of distress. Just that steady breathing and the subtle shine of his skin in the vehicle's harsh lighting. Every few minutes, I found myself checking that he was still there, still real, not some desert hallucination. The underground containment facility at Area 51 had been built for moments like this, though I wondered if even its designers had imagined we'd actually use it. The craft was housed in the main hangar, already surrounded by teams of scientists and engineers. Our visitor was taken to the medical isolation wing, a section I'd only seen during orientation tours. As they wheeled him through the reinforced doors into the secure medical bay, I stood there in the hallway, trying to process what had just happened. We'd trained for this possibility. run countless drills and scenarios. First contact protocols, alien technology recovery, biological containment procedures. It was all supposed to be theoretical, just in case planning for something that would probably never happen. But now it had happened. That man, or whatever he was, lying unconscious in our medical bay was proof that we weren't alone. Everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe had just changed. I pulled off my hazmat gear and leaned against the corridor wall, exhaustion hitting me all at once. In a few hours, once the initial chaos settled, the real questions would start. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why was he here? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why did he look so perfectly, impossibly human? The answers to those questions would have to wait. For now, all we could do was watch, study, and try to understand what had just crashed into our world. As I headed to the debriefing room, one thought kept circling in my mind. Whatever happened next, nothing was going to be the same. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, same as they had for the past 72 hours. I sat in the observation room, my fourth cup of coffee going cold while I watched our visitor through the reinforced glass. 3 days of nothing but those mechanical sounds and the quiet breathing of a man who shouldn't exist. My eyes burned from lack of proper sleep. I'd been pulling double shifts, unable to stay away from the medical bay for more than a few hours at a time. Every time I tried to leave, something pulled me back. Maybe the worry that I'd miss the moment he woke up, or maybe just the need to confirm he was still real. The medical readouts painted a picture that made no sense. Heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity, all perfectly normal for a healthy adult male. But Sarah's cellular analysis reports sat on the desk next to me, full of data that had her practically buzzing with excitement. The same common pattern she'd mentioned at the crash site, but twisted into configurations that suggested biological engineering beyond anything in our current understanding. Robert's voice crackled through the intercom. "Any change?" "Negative," I replied, not taking my eyes off the figure on the bed. "Same as the last check." "I'm sending Thompson down with the next shift rotation. You need actual sleep, Anderson." He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Call it instinct or paranoia, but after 3 days of waiting, the air in the facility felt charged with anticipation. The secure medical bay was a masterpiece of containment design. 3 layers of reinforced glass, each capable of stopping anything short of heavy ordnance. Atmospheric controls that could flood the room with sedative gas in seconds. Recording equipment capturing every angle, every breath, every twitch of muscle. We'd prepared for hostile aliens, dangerous pathogens, aggressive first contact scenarios. What we hadn't prepared for was nothing. Just a man who looked like he could be anyone's neighbor, sleeping off what should have been a fatal crash. I stood up to stretch, my joints protesting the hours spent in that uncomfortable chair. Through the observation window, I could see Sarah entering the outer medical station, wheeling in another cart of testing equipment. She'd been relentless these past 3 days, running every test she could think of and inventing new ones when the standard procedures gave impossible results. Her latest report had confirmed human DNA. Definitely, undeniably human. But the cellular structures were different. More efficient, more complex. Like comparing a modern smartphone to Alexander Graham Bell's first telephone. Same basic concept, but centuries of advancement between them. A slight movement caught my eye. Just a finger twitch, barely noticeable. I leaned forward, watching carefully. Another twitch. Then his whole hand flexed. I hit the alert button. He's waking up. The response was immediate. Robert arrived within 90 seconds, David Thompson close behind with his recording equipment. Sarah rushed in from the medical station, her eyes bright with anticipation behind her glasses. The rest of the response team filed in quickly but quietly, everyone taking their assigned positions. On the monitor, our visitor's eyes moved beneath closed lids. His breathing pattern changed, becoming less regular, more conscious. His head turned slightly on the pillow, and then his eyes opened. Not suddenly, not with any dramatic gasp or confusion. Just a calm, measured opening, like someone waking from an afternoon nap. His eyes were unusual. The irises seemed to change color as they moved, catching the light in ways that normal eyes didn't. He blinked once, twice, then turned his head to look directly at the observation window. Right at me. I felt that same strange tingling I'd experienced when we first moved him, like static electricity dancing across my skin. His look was steady, intelligent, and somehow knowing, like he could see through the one-way glass, through the walls, through everything we'd built to contain him. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the intercom system. Perfect English. No accent I could identify. The words were calm, measured, like he was greeting colleagues at a conference rather than waking up in a containment cell after a catastrophic crash. Robert grabbed the communication microphone. "This is Colonel Miller, United States Air Force. You're in a secure medical facility. Are you able to understand me?" "Perfectly, Colonel," the man replied, sitting up slowly. The medical sensor stayed steady. No spike in heart rate, no signs of distress. "My name is Adam. I apologize for the dramatic arrival. That wasn't part of the plan." "Adam," Robert repeated, his tone neutral. "Can you tell us where you're from?" A slight smile crossed Adam's face. "That's going to be the complicated part. I'm from here, Earth, just not now." Sarah couldn't contain herself. "When?" Adam turned that unsettling look toward her voice. "By your calendar, approximately the year 15,000. The room went silent except for the steady beep of monitors. I watched Robert's jaw tighten, saw David's fingers pause over his keyboard. Sarah just stared, her mind probably racing through the implications. "You're claiming to be a time traveler," Robert said flatly. "I'm not claiming anything," Adam replied. "I'm simply answering your question. I'm from Earth's future, humanity's future, to be specific. We're the same species, Colonel, just further along." Robert looked at me through the window. I knew what he was thinking. Delusion, psychological warfare, elaborate cover story, all more likely than the truth Adam was claiming. But something about the way he said it, the calm certainty in his voice. "Let's say I believe you," Robert continued. "Why are you here?" Adam swung his legs over the side of the bed, moving with that smooth grace I'd noticed when we first got him back. "Scientific observation. We study our past to better understand our present. My mission was routine. Watch, record, return. But something went wrong during my return journey. A time problem I hadn't seen coming. It damaged my navigation systems and forced an emergency landing." "In 1997, Nevada," David said, speaking for the first time. "An unfortunate coincidence," Adam agreed. "Or perhaps not. Temporal mechanics can be unpredictable." Over the next several hours, we fell into a rhythm of questions and answers. Adam stayed sitting on the medical bed, occasionally sipping water but refusing food, claiming his enhanced metabolism could go weeks without it. Every answer he gave raised 10 new questions. He described a future Earth that sounded like fantasy. Humanity had survived near extinction in the late 21st century. Climate catastrophe, resource wars, pandemic diseases that made our worst nightmares look tame. But somehow, from that crucible, we'd emerged changed, unified. The petty divisions of nation, race, and ideology had burned away in the fire of survival, leaving something better. "We don't fight anymore," he explained, his voice carrying a weight of history. "Not because we can't, but because we learned the price. Every human life became precious when there were so few left. That perspective, it changed us, evolved us." Sarah had moved into the containment area after the first hour, unable to resist the opportunity for direct observation. She ran handheld scanners over Adam while he talked, his cooperation complete and unquestioning. Every reading she took confirmed what the initial tests had shown, human but advanced. His neurons fired faster, his muscle fibers were denser, his cellular repair mechanisms operated at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. "How?" she asked, studying her readouts. "How did we evolve this much in 13,000 years?" "Time," Adam said simply, "and pressure. Evolution accelerates under extreme conditions. When the choices adapt or die, remarkable things become possible. But it wasn't just natural selection. We learned to guide our own development, to enhance what nature started, carefully, ethically, always with the goal of survival and improvement." Robert stayed doubtful, pushing for real proof. "You say you're from our future. Prove it. Tell us something that hasn't happened yet." Adam thought about this carefully. There are rules about timeline problems, guidelines we follow to prevent issues, but he stopped, seeming to consider his options. "Next week, on October 14th, your military will run Operation Desert Thunder, a joint exercise with the British RAF over the Atlantic. 2 of your F-16s will have hydraulic failures at the same time. The pilots will get out safely, but the incident will be kept secret to avoid questions about maintenance procedures." Robert's face went very still. I knew that look. It was the look he had when classified information had just been leaked. The operation Adam talked about was real. I'd seen the briefing papers. Only a handful of people knew about it. "How could you possibly know that?" Robert demanded. "Because it already happened," Adam said quietly. "For me, it's history. Well-documented history. We preserve everything, Colonel. Every moment, every decision, every life. We learned too late the cost of forgetting." The interrogation continued through the day and into the evening. Adam never showed signs of getting tired, never grew impatient with repetitive questions. He painted a picture of future humanity that was both inspiring and terrifying. We would face horrors in the coming centuries, wars that would make our current conflicts look like playground fights, environmental collapse that would kill billions, social upheavals that would tear civilization apart. But we would survive. More than survive. We would rise above it all. "The 21st century is the crucible," he explained. "Everything depends on the choices made in the next 100 years. That's why we study this period so intensely. To understand how our ancestors, you, found the strength to choose survival over destruction." David documented everything carefully, his fingers flying over his keyboard as he wrote down every word. Sometimes he would ask questions about dates, names, technical details. Adam answered what he could, always with that warning about timeline contamination. The more he talked, the more I found myself believing him, not just because of what he knew, though his knowledge of classified programs was scarily accurate, but because of how he acted. There was something heavy about him, a sense of deep time and terrible knowledge worn smooth by centuries of perspective. When he looked at us, it was with the patience of an adult watching children learn hard lessons. "Your DNA is human," Sarah said during one of her examination breaks. "But these cellular structures, they're incredible. The efficiency of your mitochondria alone is triple what we'd consider optimal. How long do your people live?" "Longer than you'd believe," Adam answered. "Death became a choice rather than an inevitability. Most choose it eventually. Existence without ending loses meaning. But we have time to truly live, to learn, to grow, to become what we were meant to be." As night fell, Robert called for a break. Adam was given basic supplies, a change of clothes from base storage, regular toiletries, reading material if he wanted it. He took everything with quiet thanks, adjusting to the simple gray jumpsuit like it was as natural as his strange future clothing. I stayed for the evening shift, unable to pull myself away. Through the window, I watched Adam sit completely still, His eyes closed, but clearly not sleeping. Sometimes his expression would change slightly. His brow would wrinkle. He'd make a face, as if he was focusing on something none of us could see. "The temporal anomalies," he said suddenly, eyes still closed. "They're getting stronger." I leaned forward to the intercom. "What weird stuff." His eyes opened, meeting mine through the glass again. "The same kind that damaged my ship. Ripples in space-time that shouldn't exist. Someone is messing with the timeline, and not carefully. The damage..." He shook his head. "It's like watching someone perform surgery with a sledgehammer." "Is that what brought you here?" I asked. "These anomalies?" "No. My mission was standard observation. But now that I'm here, trapped in this time, I can feel them more clearly. Someone, or something, is deliberately destabilizing temporal flow. If it continues..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the hint hung in the air. I thought about everything he'd told us, about humanity's future hanging on the choices made in the coming century. What would happen if someone was actively trying to change that future? The next 3 days went by quickly in a marathon of questions, tests, and discoveries. Adam went through every examination Sarah could come up with, from MRI scans to muscle biopsies. Each test showed new, impossible things: neural pathways that worked at quantum efficiency, blood cells that carried 3 times the oxygen of normal human cells, DNA repair systems that basically prevented aging. He continued to provide proof of his origins through carefully selected predictions. Small things, weather patterns, stock market changes, minor political decisions, always events that were already in motion, whose outcomes were basically determined but not yet public. Never anything that could be used to really alter the timeline. "We learned the hard way," he explained when Robert pressed him for more substantial future knowledge. "A colleague of mine once prevented a minor industrial accident in the 22nd century. Saved 12 lives. Those 12 people had descendants, made decisions, created ripples. By the time the changes propagated forward, entire cities that should have existed never came to be. Billions of potential lives erased because we thought we were being compassionate." That responsibility was obvious in his voice. Time travel, he explained, was humanity's greatest achievement and most dangerous tool. In his era, it was regulated by councils of philosophers and scientists who spent decades debating the ethics of each mission. "But you're here now," Sarah pointed out, "talking to us. Isn't that contaminating the timeline?" "My being here is already a contamination," Adam admitted. "My ship crashed where it shouldn't have. You've seen me, tested me, learned things you weren't meant to know yet. The damage is done. Now I can only try to minimize it to ensure the timeline stays as close to its original course as possible." Robert never fully let go of his doubt, but even he couldn't argue with the growing evidence. Adam's predictions came true way too often. His body readings went beyond what we thought humans could do. His knowledge of physics and time travel made Sarah dizzy, bringing up ideas our science wouldn't find for centuries. On the 6th day, something changed. Adam had been getting more and more worried about the time problems he claimed to feel. During the morning questioning session, he suddenly grabbed the sides of his bed, his face twisting like he was in pain. "It's getting worse," he gasped. "The interference is accelerating. They're rewriting key events. I can feel the timeline trying to compensate, but it's like elastic being stretched too far. If it snaps..." "What happens if it snaps?" I asked through the intercom. Adam looked up at me, and for the first time since he'd awakened, I saw fear in those strange, changing eyes. Paradox cascade. The timeline fractures. Past, present, and future become meaningless concepts. Everything that was, is, or will be, gone. The room fell silent. Even Robert looked shaken by the certainty in Adam's voice. "How do we stop it?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Adam admitted. In my time, we have safeguards, detection systems, ways to repair minor damage. But here, now, with primitive technology and no understanding of temporal mechanics, I don't know if it can be stopped. Over the following days, Adam worked with Sarah to try to find ways to detect and measure the strange things he sensed. Using our equipment in ways it was never designed for, they managed to identify subtle changes in local space-time. The readings were barely above background noise, but they were there, ripples in reality that shouldn't exist. It's intentional, Adam concluded after studying the patterns. This isn't random temporal drift or natural quantum fluctuation. Someone is deliberately altering history. But who would do this? Even in my time, the technology is restricted to a handful of carefully vetted individuals. The interrogations took on a new urgency. Adam shared everything he could about temporal mechanics, trying to give us tools to understand what was happening. Most of it went over even Sarah's head. Mathematics that wouldn't be invented for millennia, concepts that required fundamental changes in how we understood reality. Through it all, I found myself drawn to Adam's perspective on humanity. He spoke of our species with a mixture of love and sadness. We were violent, short-sighted, driven by primitive impulses we barely understood, but we were also capable of incredible beauty, unexpected compassion, and stubborn survival against impossible odds. "You're going to suffer," he told me during one late-night conversation. "The next few centuries will test everything you believe about yourselves. You'll come close to extinction more than once. But you'll survive. You'll learn. You'll become something better than you can currently imagine." I wanted to ask him for specifics, for names and dates and the key decisions that would determine our fate. But I already knew he couldn't tell me. The future had to unfold naturally, mistakes and all. That was the only way we'd learn the lessons we needed to evolve. As the second week of questioning began, Adam's condition started to change. The glow beneath his skin that I'd noticed when we first found him began to fade. His perfect health readings developed subtle problems. He got tired more easily, needing rest between sessions. "The anomalies," he explained when Sarah questioned him about it. "They're not just affecting the timeline. They're affecting me. I exist here as a temporal paradox, a future that might no longer come to pass. The more the timeline destabilizes, the more uncertain my existence becomes." The implications were huge. If the timeline changed enough, the future Adam came from might never exist, which meant he might never exist, which meant he couldn't be here warning us about the danger. The paradox made my head spin. We increased our efforts to understand the anomalies, but our technology simply wasn't advanced enough. It was like trying to perform brain surgery with stone tools. Adam did his best to guide us, but his own understanding was limited by his getting worse condition and our basic instruments. "There's so much I wish I could tell you," he said during what turned out to be our last full interrogation session. "So many wonders waiting in your future. The day humanity first leaves the solar system. The moment we crack the genetic code that lets us adapt to any environment. The celebration when the last war ends and we realize we've forgotten how to hate." His voice was weaker now, the musical quality fading to something more ordinary, more human. The shimmer under his skin was almost gone, leaving him looking pale and drawn. "But those are your discoveries to make," he continued. "Your struggles to overcome. That's what makes us human. Not the destination, but the journey. The choice to keep going when everything seems lost. To choose hope over fear, cooperation over conflict, love over hate. Those choices are what transform us from what we are into what we become." I watched him carefully, noting how he gripped the bedrail for support. Whatever was happening to the timeline was killing him, unraveling his very existence, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop it. "I need to document everything." The pen scratched across paper in steady rhythm, filling line after line with that same precise handwriting. I'd been watching Adam work for hours, his determination the only thing keeping him upright at this point. 2 weeks since he'd started documenting everything, and his body was failing faster each day. Sarah came in with her morning readings, her face telling me everything before she spoke. The cellular degradation had accelerated overnight. Where once his skin had that strange inner light, now it looked almost gray, like old newspaper left in the sun too long. His mitochondrial function is down another 12%, she said quietly, not wanting to disturb his writing. At this rate, she didn't need to finish. We all knew what was coming. Adam's hand paused mid-sentence, and he looked up at us through the observation window. Those eyes that used to change color with the light were dull now, more human than they'd ever been. He set down the pen carefully and moved his fingers, working out cramps that shouldn't have been possible for someone from his advanced civilization. "How many pages now?" Robert asked through the intercom. 3,217, Adam replied, his voice rougher than yesterday. "Almost done. The important parts anyway." The important parts? 13,000 years of human future packed into notebooks that looked like something from a college lecture. He'd been writing about everything: the climate disasters that would kill billions, the resource wars that followed, the biological plagues that nearly ended us. But also the recovery, the cooperation that grew from desperation, the slow change into something better. I'd caught glimpses over his shoulder during my shifts. Cities that floated in the sky. Humans changed to live in the ocean depths. Technology that merged consciousness with quantum fields. Stories that sounded like fantasy, but were written with the dry precision of historical fact. "You should rest," Sarah said. "Just for a few hours." Adam shook his head, already reaching for the pen again. "No time. The dissolution is speeding up. I can feel my connection to this timeline getting weaker." David had been unusually quiet during his documentation sessions lately. Now he cleared his throat. "The readings from the crash site. The magnetic problems are getting stronger." "The ship knows," Adam said without looking up from his writing. "It's connected to me. When I go, it goes. Can't leave future technology lying around the past." Another safeguard, another protection for the timeline. Even dying, Adam was careful not to mess up history more than necessary. I spent most of my shifts just sitting there, watching him write. Sometimes he'd pause and look at nothing, his expression distant, like he was remembering things that hadn't happened yet. Other times his hand would cramp so badly he'd have to stop, rubbing fingers that were losing their superhuman coordination. "Tell me about the journal," I said during one of his breaks. Adam looked up at me, thinking it over. "Everything you need to know is in here. Not everything you want to know. That would be dangerous. But enough to understand what's coming and why it matters." "The climate wars," I said. "They're really that bad? Worse than you can imagine, but also necessary. Humans don't change until they have to. The suffering teaches lessons that prosperity never could. From the ashes of the old world, something new grows. Something better." His voice had taken on that distant quality again, like he was seeing through time itself. Then another coughing fit hit him, and he was just a dying man in a containment cell again. Sarah tried everything those 2 weeks. Experimental treatments, cellular regeneration techniques based on Adam's own biology, even desperate attempts to stabilize his quantum signature. Nothing worked. How do you treat someone who's being erased from existence itself? Robert maintained his professional distance, but I caught him staring through the observation window sometimes when he thought no one was looking. This whole situation had shaken him more than he'd admit. Proof of time travel, evidence of humanity's future, and now watching that future die in front of us. 3,500 pages, Adam announced on what would be his last morning. The chronicle is complete. He set down the pen with obvious relief and struggled to his feet. The simple act of standing left him breathless, gripping the bed rail for support. "I need to speak with Colonel Miller," he said. "All of you, actually. There are things that need to be said." We gathered in the observation room while Adam stood on the other side of the glass. Even dying, even barely able to stand, there was dignity in how he held himself. "The timeline is more damaged than I initially believed," he began. "My death won't end this. The interference continues. Someone, somewhere, is still trying to rewrite history. Tell us how to stop them," Robert said immediately. Adam smiled sadly. "With your technology? Impossible, but..." He steadied himself against the wall. "The knowledge in that journal, used wisely, might help humanity prepare, not to change the future, but to survive it." He looked at each of us in turn. "Colonel Miller, your doubt serves you well. Never stop questioning. Mr. Thompson, your careful documentation may prove more important than you know. Dr. Williams, your curiosity pushes boundaries. Don't let anyone diminish that." Then his eyes found mine. "Mr. Anderson, Michael, I have a specific request for you." "Anything," I said without hesitation. "The journal. I'm entrusting it to you, not to the government, not to the military, not to the scientific community. To you, personally." Robert started to object, but Adam raised a trembling hand. "The knowledge is too dangerous to be widely known, but it's also too important to be buried in bureaucracy. Michael has the wisdom to know when and how to use it. More importantly, he has the restraint to know when not to." He was fading visibly now. That gray pallor had spread across his entire body, and I swear I could see the wall behind him through his form. "I need to come in," I said suddenly, "to receive the journal directly." Robert hesitated, then nodded. The security protocols for entering the containment area took precious minutes, but finally I was inside, standing face to face with a dying man from paradise. Up close, the deterioration was even more obvious. His breathing was shallow and difficult. The hand he reached toward me shook like an old man's. "The journal," he said simply. I picked up the stack of notebooks from the small desk. 13,000 years of human triumph and tragedy, all right here in my arms. "Guard it well," Adam said. "And remember, the future isn't fixed. It's chosen, every day, by every person, in every small decision. Make sure humanity chooses wisely." His legs gave out then. I dropped the journals to catch him, easing him back onto the bed. He felt so light, like he was barely there. "It's time," he whispered. Sarah burst in with her medical team, scanners ready, but we all knew there was nothing to be done. Adam's form was becoming translucent, like looking at him through frosted glass. "Thank you," he said, his voice coming from very far away. "For believing, for listening, for being the humans who will become us." The breakdown sped up. His outline became fuzzy, getting unclear. The medical monitors went crazy, then flatlined one by one, not because his heart stopped, but because there was nothing left for them to detect. I watched Adam fade like a projection losing power. His eyes found mine one last time, calm and accepting. Then he was gone. Not dead. Just gone. The bed was empty, his gray jumpsuit lying flat where his body had been. "Temporal cascade complete," Sarah said, reading her instruments with shaking hands. "Massive quantum fluctuations centered on..." She stopped, staring at the readings. "There's nothing there. According to these sensors, there was never anything there." Robert was already on the radio, checking with the teams watching the crash site. The report came back within minutes. The ship had disappeared. Aerial surveillance showed only a perfect circle of melted sand where it had been. "Full lockdown," Robert ordered. "Everything gets classified. Recordings, medical data, all of it. This never happened." But it had happened. I held the proof in my arms. Thousands of pages of carefully written future history. Adam's legacy, given to me for reasons I didn't fully understand. The next hours were controlled chaos. Every piece of equipment that had touched Adam was put away and checked. Every recording was copied and locked away. Every person who'd had contact with him was questioned and sworn to deeper secrecy than even our usual protocols demanded. I took the journal to the most secure vault in the facility, a place designed to survive nuclear war. As I placed the notebooks on the shelf, I felt Adam's trust. This knowledge could change everything: prevent disasters, save billions of lives, advance our technology by centuries. But it could also cause exactly the kind of paradoxes Adam had warned about: save the wrong life, prevent the wrong disaster, and the entire timeline could unravel. The future Adam came from, that paradise where humanity had learned to go beyond its limitations, might never come to pass. I locked the vault and pocketed the key. For now, the journal would stay hidden, but I would remember where it was. And if the temporal problems Adam detected grew worse, if someone really was trying to erase our future, at least we'd have his warning. Walking back through the empty corridors of Area 51, I thought about Adam's final words. The future wasn't fixed. It was chosen every day by everyone. We'd been given a glimpse of what we could become, not as a guide to follow, but as a reminder of what was possible. Somewhere out there, someone was trying to stop that future from happening. Adam had died to warn us, giving up his existence to preserve the timeline. Now it was up to us to make sure humanity survived long enough to fulfill the destiny he'd shown us. I returned to my duties, carrying secrets that would have broken a weaker mind. But I also carried hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the climate disasters, the wars, the plagues, we would survive them. We would learn. We would evolve. We just had to make the right choices. 26 years can change everything, or it can change nothing at all. The same monitors still shined in my office at Area 51. The same concrete walls surrounded me, but I'd aged into them now. My hair had gone gray at the temples, matching the security clearance level I'd achieved after decades of keeping impossible secrets. I pushed back from my desk and walked to the wall safe hidden behind a framed photo of the Mojave Desert. The combination came automatically after all these years. Adam's arrival date reversed. Inside sat the same leather-bound journals I'd locked away in 1997, their pages yellowed, but the ink still sharp and clear. The morning headlines on my computer screen could have been pulled directly from Adam's writings. Hurricane Sophia had just devastated the Gulf Coast, the third Category 5 storm this season. The water wars between India and Pakistan were getting worse, exactly on schedule. The new quantum computing breakthrough announced last week matched Adam's timeline down to the month. I'd resisted looking at the journals for years, keeping my promise to leave them untouched. But as the world moved toward the disasters Adam had written about, I found myself checking his predictions more often. Not to change anything. I understood the danger there, but to prepare myself for what was coming. Sarah knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through decades of shared secrets. Her auburn hair had faded to silver, but her mind stayed as sharp as ever. She carried a tablet showing atmospheric readings that made my chest tighten. "The greenhouse gas concentrations," she said, setting the tablet on my desk. "They're accelerating faster than any model predicted. Except Adam's," I finished. She nodded, adjusting her glasses. A newer pair, but the same nervous habit. "Michael, I've been thinking. What if we use just a small piece of the knowledge? Not enough to change the timeline dramatically, but maybe to ease the transition, reduce the suffering." "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "We've had this discussion before. Adam was clear about the dangers." "Adam is dead," Sarah said quietly. "Has been for 26 years. Meanwhile, billions are going to die in the next decade if his predictions hold true." I locked the journal back in the safe, my movements careful and final. "They'll die anyway if we create a paradox. You heard what he said about his colleague who saved 12 people. Entire cities that should have existed gone. Billions of potential lives erased. Sarah's shoulders dropped. She'd aged into her brilliance, publishing papers on theoretical physics that came close to what we'd learned without revealing the source. The scientific community called her visionary. If they only knew she was working from a cheat sheet written by humanity's future. "Any word from Miller?" she asked, changing the subject. "He called last week. Enjoying retirement in Montana, far from any major cities." I smiled at the memory of our conversation. "Still thinks we should have published everything back in '97. Says the world has a right to know." "And Thompson?" "Radio silence for 3 years now. Last I heard, he was consulting for some tech firm in Silicon Valley." Sarah stood to leave, then paused at the door. "The temporal scanners I've been developing, they picked up something odd this morning. Quantum fluctuations that match the patterns from atoms' dissolution." My hand stopped halfway to my coffee mug. "What kind of fluctuations?" "Small, localized, but growing stronger. I've been monitoring them for a week now, trying to determine if they're natural or..." The lights in my office flashed. Not just flashed. They pulsed in a rhythm that made my skin crawl with recognition. The computer screen shook, displaying static that formed almost patterns before dissolving. My secure phone began ringing with no incoming number, then cut off mid-tone. Sarah's tablet went dead in her hands. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds, our breath misting in the suddenly cold air. The overhead fluorescence dimmed to amber, then blazed white-hot before settling into an unstable shimmer. "Michael," Sarah whispered, backing toward the door. But I wasn't looking at her. I was watching the center of my office, where the air itself had started to shine, not like fire or electricity, like starlight pressed into human shape. The brightness built slowly, threads of energy weaving together into a familiar outline. The figure that appeared wasn't solid. It existed as patterns of light that hinted rather than spelled out, constant motion contained in almost human shape. But even transformed into pure energy, I recognized him. Adam. The being that had been Adam turned toward me, and I felt that same static charge from 26 years ago, magnified 100-fold. When he spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the walls themselves. "Hello, Michael. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Subtlety becomes difficult when you exist as a quantum probability wave." Sarah had pressed herself against the door, tablet held tight to her chest. I stayed perfectly still, mind racing through what this meant. Adam had disappeared, stopped existing, been erased from the timeline. Yet here he stood, or floated, or existed, in my office. "You died," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "We watched you fade away." I transcended. Future Adam corrected, his form pulsing with each word. "Death implies an ending. What happened to me was translation. From matter to energy, from fixed existence to quantum superposition. I exist now as possibility rather than certainty." The office equipment had stopped breaking down, settling into a low, electrical buzz that made my teeth ache. Future Adam's presence seemed to settle, the wild energy pulling together into clearer definition. He looked like Adam, but vague, a memory of a body rather than a body itself. "Why now?" Sarah asked, finding her scientific courage. 26 years of silence, and you appear today?" Future Adam's attention moved to her, and I saw her shiver at the contact. "Because the timeline is collapsing faster than I predicted. The interference I detected in 1997 has accelerated beyond sustainable parameters. Someone is actively working to prevent humanity's future." I thought of the journal locked in my safe, of the careful predictions playing out with clockwork precision. The climate disasters, the wars, they're all happening exactly as you documented. Yes, those events are fixed points, necessary for humanity's evolution, but other changes are occurring, subtle alterations that compound over time. Key individuals dying who should have lived. Technologies being discovered too early or too late. Decisions being influenced by actors who shouldn't exist in this time frame. The energy that comprised his form flickered, showing stress fractures like cracks in glass. Whatever allowed him to manifest was taking enormous effort. Rogue time travelers, he continued, each word seeming to cost him. From the year 50,000, my era was paradise compared to theirs. They've evolved beyond anything I showed you, beyond physical form, beyond conventional consciousness. They view earlier humanity as experiments, test subjects for their theories about temporal causality. Sarah stepped forward, tablet forgotten. 50,000 years. But that's incomprehensible, yes. They exist as pure thought, manifesting only when they choose to interact with physical reality. To them, we're less than insects. Our entire civilization is just data points in their research. The temperature in the room dropped further. Frost began forming on the windows even though Nevada's desert heat was right outside. Future Adam's shape got smaller, fighting to stay solid. They're systematically altering history, he said urgently. Testing how changes propagate through time. What happens if Hitler dies in childhood? If Rome never falls? If the atomic bomb is never invented? They create alternate timelines, study the results, then collapse them and start over. Collapse them, I repeated, the words tasting like ashes. You mean complete erasure? Every person who ever lived in those timelines, gone. Billions of souls eliminated for academic curiosity. And now, they're experimenting with our timeline, the prime timeline that leads to humanity's true future. His shape sparked and moved around. The lights flashed again, and I heard distant alarms beginning to sound throughout the facility. Whatever energy future Adam was using to show up was affecting the entire base. I've been fighting them, he said, voice distorting. Existing in quantum space allows me to detect their interference, sometimes even prevent it. But I'm one being against dozens. They're winning, Michael. Unless they're stopped, everything Adam showed you, everything humanity could become, it will never exist. Only their sterile future will remain, built on the graves of infinite possibilities. The alarms grew louder. I could hear running footsteps in the corridor outside. Security would arrive soon, and I had no idea how to explain the glowing figure in my office. "What do you need us to do?" I asked. Future Adam's shape became solid for a moment, almost human again. I saw not the calm being from paradise, but someone who'd been fighting a war across time itself. He looked tired in ways that went beyond just being physically worn out. "The journal contains more than history," he said. "Hidden in the quantum structure of the ink itself are instructions, weapons against beings who exist outside normal space-time. I couldn't reveal them in 1997. You lacked the technology to detect them. But now..." The door burst open. Security officers ran in, weapons drawn, then froze at the sight of future Adam. I heard someone whispering prayers. Another guard's weapon fell to the floor from shaking fingers. "Find the hidden pages," future Adam said, his voice fading as his form began to dissipate. "Unite your team. The rogues have a base in this time frame. I'll help you locate it. But Michael..." His eyes found mine across dimensions. "This will likely be a one-way journey for all of us. The rogues don't just kill bodies. They erase existence itself. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of the world outside, following Adam's predicted path toward disaster and redemption, of the future humanity that would rise from our ashes, wise and transformed, of the beings from 50,000 years from now who would erase it all for curiosity. "We'll stop them," I said. Future Adam smiled, a very human expression on his inhuman face. "I knew I chose correctly 26 years ago. I'll return when you've decoded the journal. Be ready." He disappeared like a switch being thrown. leaving only the smell of ozone and the testimony of a dozen witnesses. The alarms continued their shrill cry as emergency teams responded to the base-wide energy surge. I looked at Sarah, who was already pulling up quantum scanning algorithms on her tablet, then at the security officers who stood frozen in various states of shock and awe. 26 years I'd kept Adam's secret. Now it seemed that secret was about to become a war across time itself. The journal waited in my safe, holding weapons I couldn't yet imagine against enemies that defied comprehension. But first I had some phone calls to make. Robert might be retired, but I had a feeling he'd want in on this mission. And Thompson, wherever he was, needed to know that our past was about to collide with a future that wanted us extinct. The fate of human history hung in the balance, and a handful of aging secret keepers were its only defense. The phone rang 4 times before Robert picked up. I could hear wind through the line, Montana prairie wind that made me remember how different his life had become from mine. "Michael," he said, and even after 3 years his voice carried that same commanding tone. "I was wondering when you'd call. You felt it too?" I gripped the receiver tighter, still standing in my office where reality had bent around future Adam's appearance 20 minutes ago. "Power fluctuations all the way up here. Sarah sent me her atmospheric readings last week. I've been waiting." I closed my eyes, grateful I wouldn't have to explain the impossible. After 26 years of shared secrets, Robert understood what others couldn't. "I need you back here. Tonight, if possible." A long pause. I heard a door close, shutting out the Montana wind. "That serious?" Adam came back, or a version of him. He exists as pure energy now, and Rob... I forced myself to say it. "This is probably a one-way trip." Another pause, longer this time, then a dry laugh. "Hell, Michael. At 73, every trip might be one way. I'll catch the next flight." Finding David Thompson proved harder. His last known employer, a Silicon Valley tech firm, claimed he'd left 2 years ago. No forwarding address, no LinkedIn updates, nothing. It took 6 phone calls to former colleagues before someone mentioned he'd moved to Austin, doing private security consulting. Sarah helped track him down through her research contacts. Within an hour, she had a phone number for a D. Thompson running a small firm specializing in discreet protection services. I recognized the paranoia immediately. David had gone underground, just not as deep as he'd probably planned. "This line better be secure," was how he answered. "It's Michael Anderson." Silence stretched between us. I could almost hear him calculating threat assessments, weighing whether to hang up or listen. "Area 51, Michael?" he finally asked. "The same. I need you here, David. It's about the project." "That project ended 26 years ago." "No," I said. "It just paused. And now it's going to end everything unless we stop it." By evening, Robert had arrived, looking older but still standing straight like a soldier. David flew in close to midnight, carrying a single bag and enough suspicion to fill a warehouse. Sarah had spent the day preparing a secure briefing room, one with extra electromagnetic protection after our morning's energy surge. We sat around the same table where we'd first talked about Adam's arrival decades ago. The years showed on all of us. Robert's silver hair, David's wrinkled face, Sarah's reading glasses, my own hands that weren't quite as steady as they used to be. "Before we start," Robert said, "I need to know this is real, not some elaborate..." The lights dimmed. That known static charge filled the air, making my skin tingle with memory. Future Adam appeared in stages, first as scattered points of light, then flowing patterns finally forming into his almost human shape. David's hand went to where his sidearm would have been. Robert's jaw tightened, military discipline keeping him still. Sarah leaned forward, fascinated even though she'd seen this before. "Hello again," future Adam said, his voice coming from everywhere at once. "Thank you for answering Michael's call." "Jesus Christ," David whispered. "Not quite," future Adam replied with something like humor. "Though I understand the comparison. given my current state. I watched my old team process the impossible. Again. At least this time we had precedent. "You're the one who dissolved," Robert said, studying the energy form with narrowed eyes. "We watched you die." "Death is a limited concept," Future Adam replied. "I translated to a different state of existence, one that allows me to perceive threats you cannot see." Over the next hour, Future Adam laid out the full scope of what we faced. The beings from 50,000 years in the future weren't just advanced. They'd evolved past the need for physical form entirely. They existed as living mathematics, conscious equations that could rewrite reality by altering the variables. "Imagine," Future Adam explained, "beings who see the universe as code. To them, changing history is like editing a document. Delete a line here, insert a paragraph there. They're running experiments on human history, testing how consciousness develops under different conditions." Sarah had filled 3 notebooks already, her pen flying across pages. But why? What could beings that advanced possibly learn from primitive humans? Future Adam's body pulsed with something like sadness. They've moved past empathy, past any connection to their origins. To them, we're not ancestors, we're data. They want to understand consciousness at its root by manipulating its development across time. "And these experiments," Robert said slowly, "they're dangerous to the timeline. Each change creates ripples. Most are small, self-correcting, but they're becoming bolder. Last week, they prevented a key scientist from being born in 1952. Yesterday, they inserted a technology breakthrough in 1987 that shouldn't happen until 2045. Each alteration weakens the timeline's stability." David spoke for the first time since the briefing began. "You mentioned a base, here, in Nevada." Future Adam's figure moved, and suddenly the air above our table filled with light. A 3-dimensional map appeared, showing familiar Nevada terrain. But beneath the surface, revealed in ghostly blue lines, was a structure that hurt to look at directly. 30 miles east of here," Future Adam said. "They've built a research station that exists partially outside normal space-time. From there, they can access any point in history within a 1,000-year radius." The structure in the projection made no sense. Hallways that looped back on themselves, rooms that existed in multiple places at once. My eyes watered trying to follow the impossible building design. "How do we fight beings that advanced?" Robert asked, his tactical mind already working the problem. Future Adam gestured, and objects materialized on the table. They looked like weapons, but wrong. Barrels that twisted through impossible angles, triggers that seemed to exist in several places at once. "These are modified from my era's technology," he explained. "They fire concentrated temporal disruption fields. To beings who exist partially outside time, they're like bullets to flesh." David picked one up, his security expert's hands automatically checking weight and balance. "Assuming we can even find them. If they're that evolved." "I can see them," Future Adam interrupted. "My current state allows me to perceive their quantum signatures. I'll guide you." Sarah looked up from her notes. "The journal. You said there were hidden instructions in the quantum structure of the ink?" "Yes. Your technology has advanced enough to detect them. The journal contains blueprints for shields against temporal manipulation, methods to stabilize localized space-time, and most importantly," his form flickered, "a way to seal dimensional breaches permanently." I felt the weight of what we were planning. 4 people in their 60s and 70s, plus an energy being against creatures from 50,000 years in the future. "We'll need 3 days," I said. "Minimum. To decode the journal, practice with these weapons, plan our approach." 3 days is acceptable," Future Adam agreed. "The rogue faction is currently focused on an experiment in 12th century Japan, but they'll return their attention here soon." Robert stood, slipping back into his colonel persona after all these years. "Then we'd better get started. Sarah, you work on decoding the journal. David, you and I will figure out these weapons. Michael, I'll coordinate, I said, and work with Adam on tactical planning. Future Adam's shape began to fade. I'll return tomorrow with more detailed intelligence. Rest tonight. You'll need your strength. He vanished, leaving us 4 aging guards of humanity's timeline staring at each other across impossible weapons. Anyone else feeling too old for this? David asked. Speak for yourself, Robert replied, but his grin took the sting out of it. Sarah gathered her notes, already lost in theoretical possibilities. The quantum ink structures, if I can isolate the frequency patterns. And just like that, we fell back into our old roles. The years disappeared, leaving the same team that had handled humanity's first contact with its own future. Only now, instead of welcoming a visitor from paradise, we were preparing for war against gods. I spent that first night reviewing everything Adam had told us about the rogue faction, beings that existed as living math, creatures that could erase entire family lines with a thought, entities so far beyond human that we registered as little more than bacteria to them. But bacteria could still cause infection, and sometimes the smallest organisms could bring down the mightiest. Sarah worked through the night in her lab, using quantum scanners to decode the hidden information in Adam's journal. I found her there at dawn, surrounded by printouts covered in equations that made my head spin. It's incredible, she said, not looking up from her work. The information was always there, encoded at the subatomic level. Every penstroke contains libraries of data. She showed me partial plans for devices that twisted physics into impossible shapes, shield generators that made pockets of stable time, weapons that could lock a being into a single temporal state, tools for fighting a war across 4 dimensions. Robert and David spent the second day training with the temporal weapons. The firing range repeated sounds that shouldn't exist, whines that pitched up into silence, cracks that arrived before the trigger pull. David adapted fastest, his paranoid mindset apparently perfect for weapons that required you to think sideways. It's about intention, he explained, adjusting his grip on a rifle-shaped impossibility. You're not aiming at where they are, but where they might be, or were, or will be. Robert mastered the tactical applications, working out firing positions and cover strategies for a battlefield where enemies could attack from yesterday. His Montana retirement had done nothing to dull his military instincts. Future Adam showed up now and then, each time sharing more intelligence about our target. The rogue faction's base existed in what he called a temporal fold, a pocket of space tucked outside normal time flow. From there, they could watch and manipulate history like scientists studying bacteria under a microscope. They have defenses, he warned during one briefing. Automated systems that exist in multiple time streams simultaneously, guardian constructs that can age you to dust or reverse you to non-existence. The base itself resists linear thinking. How many of them? Robert asked. Currently, 4 primary researchers and approximately 12 subordinate entities. But understand, each one could destroy this entire facility with a thought if they perceived us as a genuine threat. Our advantage is that they won't. To them, we're less than insects. They won't expect insects to carry temporal disruptors. On the morning of the 3rd day, we gathered in the motor pool. 2 modified Humvees waited, their armor plating added with Sarah's prototype temporal shields. The vehicles buzzed with barely contained energy, occasionally flashing as if uncertain about which moment they existed in. I loaded the decoded weapons, each one secured in cases. Sarah triple-checked her scanning equipment, devices put together from future Adam's specifications and modern technology. David ran through tactical communications, ensuring our radios would work even if time decided to hiccup. Robert studied satellite photos of our target area, though we all knew the images showed only empty desert. Remember, Future Adam said, manifesting beside the vehicles. Once we breach their perimeter, they'll know we're there. Speed will matter more than stealth. get to the central laboratory, destroy their temporal manipulation equipment, and seal the dimensional breach. Everything else is secondary. I looked at my team, 4 people who'd already saved the world once, about to attempt it again with bodies that creaked and minds that sometimes forgot where they'd left their reading glasses. But I also saw the same determination that had carried us through Adam's first arrival. Sarah's brilliant curiosity, Robert's steady leadership, David's protective instincts. We might be older, but we were also wiser. And we had something the rogue faction couldn't understand: connection to our humanity, to the messy, imperfect, beautiful species we were fighting to protect. "Mount up," Robert ordered. And for a moment he was the same colonel who'd taken charge 26 years ago. I climbed into the lead vehicle with Sarah, while Robert and David took the second. Future Adam flowed between both, his energy form not held back by physical space. The temporal shields turned on with a sound like reality clearing its throat. As we rolled out of Area 51, heading east into the morning desert, I thought about the journal locked in my safe, about the future Adam had shown us, humanity's growth through disaster, evolution through suffering, rising above through unity. All of it hung in the balance now, threatened by beings who'd evolved past caring about their own origins. But they'd made a mistake. They'd forgotten that insects could bite, that bacteria could infect, that 4 aging humans and an energy ghost might be enough to save all of history. The Nevada desert went on ahead of us, empty and full of hidden possibilities. Somewhere out there, creatures from an impossible-to-understand future were playing God with human history, and we were driving straight toward them, armed with impossible weapons, and the stubborn refusal to let our species be edited out of existence. The Humvee's engine growled against the desert terrain, each bump and dip sending my stomach lurching in ways that reminded me I wasn't 25 anymore. Sarah sat beside me, her eyes glued to the quantum scanner she jury-rigged from future Adam's specifications. The device buzzed and clicked, occasionally sparking in ways that made me nervous about having it so close to the vehicle's fuel tank. "Still nothing," Sarah muttered, adjusting dials that looked like they'd been salvaged from 3 different decades of technology. Just normal background radiation. I checked the odometer. 28 miles out from Area 51. I gripped the wheel tighter as I squinted through the windshield at empty desert that looked exactly like every other patch of Nevada wasteland we'd crossed. Sagebrush, rocks, and heat that made the horizon dance. 2 more miles! Future Adam's voice resonated through the cab. He flowed between our vehicle and Robert's, his energy form creating strange shadows that didn't match the sun's angle. "The cloaking field extends for a half-mile radius. You won't detect anything until we're directly on top of it." In my rearview mirror, I could see Robert's Humvee keeping pace, David's alert figure visible in the passenger seat. Even after all these years, Thompson kept that same watchful tension, like a guard dog that never quite relaxed. The radio crackled. "Anderson, you seeing anything up there?" Robert's voice, steady as granite. "Negative. Just more dessert." "Copy that. Maintaining position." Another mile crawled by. The scanner in Sarah's lap started making new sounds, lower pitched, almost like a heartbeat. She leaned forward, tapping the screen with one finger. "Wait, I'm getting something. It's faint, but..." The world lurched. Not the vehicle. Reality itself seemed to skip like a scratched record. For half a second, the desert ahead of us flickered, showing something else underneath. Metal, glass, geometry that made my eyes water. Then it snapped back to sand and sage. "Stop here," Future Adam commanded. I hit the brakes, sending up a cloud of dust that drifted lazily in the morning air. The second Humvee pulled up beside us, Robert already climbing out with his weapon at ready position. Old habits from Vietnam, I figured. Some training never left you. We gathered in front of the vehicles, 4 aging humans and 1 energy ghost, staring at what looked like absolutely nothing special. Just more desert, complete with a half-dead Joshua tree and some scattered rocks. "I don't see," David started. Future Adam moved forward, his shape getting more solid until he almost looked real. He raised one see-through hand and the air in front of us began to crack. Not break, crack, like ice under pressure, spreading in web patterns that hung in space. "The cloaking field uses bent light and temporal displacement," he explained, his hand moving in slow, deliberate gestures. "But it's still anchored to physical reality. Find the anchor points." The cracks spread wider. Through them, I caught quick looks at something that shouldn't exist. Metal surfaces that curved in directions my brain couldn't understand. Windows that looked out on views that weren't there. With a sound like reality clearing its throat, the cloaking field collapsed. The structure that appeared made my teeth ache just looking at it. A metallic pyramid, except the angles were wrong. The sides bent inward and outward at the same time, creating something that left me dizzy. The entrance was a rectangular opening that somehow looked circular from certain angles. "Jesus," David whispered. "No," Robert said, his voice tight. Something a lot less friendly. Sarah already had 3 different scanners out, their screens showing readings that made her face pale. The temporal distortions. "Michael, this thing is anchored in at least 4 different time periods at the same time." I made myself walk closer, each step feeling like I was pushing through thick water. The air around the structure shook with wrongness, making my skin crawl with that same static feeling I'd felt around Adam and future Adam. "Stay together," future Adam warned. "The interior will be worse. The rogue faction built this place according to their understanding of physics, not yours. Your minds will try to make sense of it and fail. Focus on your immediate surroundings, not the larger picture." The entrance stood before us, and I use that word deliberately, even though I promised not to. But there was no other way to describe how a simple doorway could feel so oppressive. Through it, I saw a hallway that seemed to stretch forever and end just a few feet away at the same time. "Weapons check," Robert ordered, falling back on military protocol when faced with the incomprehensible. We checked our temporal disruptors, the weapons buzzing with barely contained energy. David tested his comm unit, confirming we still had contact with each other in the vehicles. Sarah strapped her portable scanning equipment across her back, looking like a very overeducated pack mule. "Once we're inside," future Adam said, "I'll be able to manifest more fully. The temporal distortions actually make it easier for me to maintain cohesion. But that works both ways. The rogue faction will be at full strength in there." I took a deep breath of normal Nevada air, probably my last for a while, and stepped through the entrance. The transition hit hard, not physically, mentally. My brain tried to process what I was seeing and came up with errors. The corridor ahead curved up and down and sideways all at once. The walls were covered in symbols that moved and changed as I watched, never quite the same twice. The floor felt solid under my feet, but looked like it was flowing. "Don't look at the walls," Robert barked. "Eyes forward, watch your step." We moved in single file, Robert leading with David bringing up the rear. Sarah kept one hand on my shoulder, grounding herself in physical contact while her other hand worked her scanner. The readings, she whispered, made no sense. Negative space, inverted time fields, probability cascades. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that my eyes insisted was both the size of an aircraft hangar and no bigger than a closet. The contradiction made my head pound. Equipment filled the space, if you could call it equipment. Structures of light and shadow that pulsed with their own rhythm. Geometric shapes that had too many or too few sides. Screens showing images that changed based on viewing angle. And in the center of it all, 3 beings that had once been human. I say beings because there was no other word. They'd evolved so far past physical body that looking at them was like trying to focus on a math equation given body. One existed as interlocking triangles that folded through themselves. Another looked like a Klein bottle made of living light. The third was just angles, pure angles with no substance between them. They noticed us the way you'd notice dust motes in sunlight. A vague acknowledgement that something had entered their space, nothing more. The primary researchers, Future Adam whispered, his form solidifying in the chamber's twisted atmosphere. They're monitoring 17 different timeline experiments from here. Sarah's scanner went crazy, beeping and sparking until she had to shut it off. The temporal distortion readings are off the scale. They're not just observing history. They're actively rewriting it from this room. One of the beings, the triangle one, shifted its attention to us. When it communicated, the words appeared directly in my mind without sound. Primitive forms, pre-transcendent. Why do you interrupt? The casual dismissal in that mental voice made my jaw clench. To them, we were less than insects, just primitive forms stumbling into their grand experiment. "Secure the exits," Robert muttered to David, who immediately moved to cover the doorway we'd entered through. The being seemed amused by our movements. "You carry temporal disruptors. Quaint. Do you believe those will affect us?" "Maybe we should find out," I said, my hand moving to my weapon. "Wait." This came from the second being, the Klein bottle construct. It moved closer, and I felt reality bend around it like space was made of taffy. "You travel with a translated one." "Interesting." Future Adam stepped forward, his energy form blazing brighter. "They're destroying the timeline. Every experiment they run erases billions of potential lives. Lives that never existed cannot be destroyed," the third being interrupted, its angles changing in ways that hurt to track. "We study consciousness evolution. Each timeline provides data. Knowledge is preserved even as realities collapse." "Knowledge," I spat the word. "You're murdering entire timelines for knowledge?" The triangle pulsed with something like amusement. "Murder implies the ending of actual existence. These are potential existences, shadows of might be, no different from the countless futures you destroy with every choice you make." Sarah had managed to get one of her scanners working again, and her face went white at the readings. "Michael, the equipment in this room, it's connected to time streams going back thousands of years. They're running experiments on human history like we're lab rats." "An apt comparison," the Klein bottle agreed. "Though you give yourselves too much credit. Bacteria might be more accurate." I'd heard enough. These things might have changed beyond humanity, but they'd also changed beyond any trace of empathy or morality. They were playing God with time itself, and they needed to be stopped. "David, Robert, Pattern Alpha," I called out, using code words we'd established during our planning. David immediately moved to flank the beings while Robert brought his temporal disruptor to bear on the nearest equipment cluster. Sarah pulled out her prototype temporal stabilizer, fingers flying over the controls. The geometric beings watched with what felt like amusement. "You cannot damage equipment that exists outside your temporal frame. Your weapons cannot harm beings who transcend physical reality. This is futile." "Maybe," I admitted, raising my own weapon. "But we're going to try anyway." The triangle moved, and suddenly I understood the true scope of what we were facing. Images flooded my mind, thousands of alternate timelines, each one an experiment in human development. I saw Earths where Rome never fell, where the Black Death never happened, where nuclear war had ended civilization in 1962. Each timeline had been created, studied, and discarded like a scientist throwing away petri dishes. But worse than that was the revelation of their ultimate goal. They weren't just studying consciousness evolution. They were trying to create the perfect timeline, one that would produce beings even more advanced than themselves, and they were willing to sacrifice infinite versions of humanity to find it. "You're insane," I breathed, the weapon shaking in my hands. "Sanity is a concept for limited minds," the being replied. "We seek optimization, perfection, the ultimate expression of consciousness evolution." "What about the consciousness of all the beings you're erasing?" Sarah demanded, her her temporal stabilizer humming with building energy. Acceptable losses for greater knowledge. That's when I noticed something else. Future Adam had been moving while we talked, positioning himself near a huge structure that looked like a crystal tree made of frozen time. His energy body flashed with purpose. "You want to know about consciousness evolution?" Future Adam said, his voice carrying new harmonics. "Let me show you what you've forgotten." He touched the crystal structure and everything went white. When my vision cleared, we were still in the chamber, but something had changed. The geometric beings were bothered. Their perfect shapes wavered, showing cracks of uncertainty. "What did you do?" I asked Future Adam. "Reminded them of their humanity," he replied. "Every evolved being carries the echo of what they were. I just amplified it." The triangle being's shape shuddered. For just a moment I saw something underneath, a shadow of the human it had once been, millions of years ago. The recognition in its pattern was clear. No, we went beyond those limitations. "You abandoned them," Future Adam corrected. "But they're still there, buried under eons of evolution. The capacity for empathy, for connection, for caring about others. You've suppressed it, but you can't eliminate it entirely." The beings were struggling now, their perfect geometric shapes changing as buried humanity tried to come back. The Klein bottle being actually screamed, a sound like reality ripping that made my ears bleed. That's when I realized the true danger we were in. If these things reconnected with their humanity while wielding godlike power, the psychological shock could make them unstable. And unstable beings who could rewrite reality were not something I wanted to be standing next to. "We need to move," I said. "Now." But Robert and David were already in position, taking advantage of the being's distraction. Robert fired his temporal disruptor at a bank of equipment, and this time it worked. The distracted beings couldn't maintain their protective fields. The equipment exploded in a shower of sparks that existed in multiple time periods at the same time. David targeted another section, his shots precise and methodical. Each destroyed piece of equipment sent shock waves through the chamber, making the impossible architecture groan and move. The geometric beings rallied, trying to reassert control. The triangle being lashed out with a wave of temporal energy that aged a section of floor through 1,000,000 years in seconds. The Klein bottle created duplicates of itself from alternate timelines, filling the chamber with versions of itself from other realities. But Sarah had finished calibrating her temporal stabilizer. She activated it with a triumphant shout, and suddenly a bubble of normal space-time expanded around us. Inside the bubble, physics worked normally. Cause preceded effect. Up was up and down was down. "Fascinating," she breathed, watching the readings. "The stabilizer is creating a pocket of our timeline, isolated from their manipulations." It was working, but I could see the strain on the device. It wasn't meant to maintain this kind of field against this level of opposition. We had minutes at most. "Future Adam," I called out. "What's the primary target? What do we need to destroy to stop them?" He pointed to a structure I hadn't noticed before, a sphere of pure black that seemed to eat light. "The time anchor. It's what allows them to access multiple timelines from this fixed point. Destroy it, and the base becomes unstuck from time. And them? They'll be swept away by temporal currents, unable to maintain position in any single timeline." The rogue faction leader, because I realized that's what the triangle being was, heard this exchange. Its shape became solid with new purpose. "You would strand us in the temporal void, condemn us to existence between moments? You condemned billions to never exist at all," I shot back. "Seems fair to me." The battle started then. Geometric beings against human stubbornness, godlike power against temporal disruptors and pure determination. The room became a war zone across multiple dimensions, with attacks coming from yesterday and tomorrow at the same time. But even as we fought, even as reality cracked and reformed around us, I knew we were outmatched. These beings had evolved for millions of years. We were just four old humans with borrowed weapons and a ghost made of energy. That's when I understood what future Adam had been trying to tell us. This wasn't just about stopping rogue time travelers. This was about the basic question of what evolution meant, what transcendence cost, and whether becoming more than human meant losing humanity itself. The geometric beings had their answer. They'd chosen power over empathy, knowledge over connection, perfection over messy human imperfection. But looking at my team, Robert's determination, David's protectiveness, Sarah's brilliant curiosity, future Adam's sacrifice to save a past he'd never see again, I knew we had a different answer. Sometimes being human was enough. The triangle being's attack came without warning. One second I was raising my temporal disruptor. The next I felt myself unraveling. Not physically, something deeper. My memories started going away at the edges, childhood moments disappearing. I looked down at my hands and watched them become see-through, reality forgetting I existed. No. Future Adam's voice cut through the dissolution. His energy form blazed between me and the rogue leader, creating a barrier that crackled with temporal static. The fading stopped, my hands solidifying again, but I could feel how close I'd come to being edited out of existence entirely. The geometric being pulsed with what I recognized as frustration. You protect these primitives? You waste your evolution on sentiment? I choose to remember what you've forgotten, future Adam replied, his form spreading wider to shield all of us. That's when the real battle began. I'd seen plenty of firefights in my military days, but nothing prepared me for combat across multiple dimensions. The rogue beings attacked through time itself, strikes that arrived before they were thrown, defenses that existed in parallel moments. Future Adam met each assault with his own temporal manipulations, turning their attacks inside out, redirecting their energy through impossible angles. Robert and David had given up trying to target the beings directly. Instead, they focused on the equipment surrounding us, firing their disruptors at anything that looked important. Each hit caused explosions that didn't follow normal physics, blasts that expanded backwards through time, shrapnel that aged to dust before impact, flames that burned in colors I didn't have names for. "Keep hitting the machinery," Robert shouted over the chaos. "If we can't hurt them, we'll destroy their toys." A control panel near David erupted in sparks that formed geometric patterns before dissolving. The explosion sent him stumbling back, but he kept firing, his security instincts overriding any confusion about the impossible physics around us. Sarah had found shelter behind an equipment bank, her scanners working overtime in spite of the interference. She looked up at me with wide eyes behind her glasses. "Michael, I'm reading tens of thousands of timeline signatures in their databases. They're not just watching alternate histories. They're creating them, experimenting on human consciousness across every possible variation." The Klein bottle being flowed past our defensive position, and I caught fragmented images from its presence. Earth after Earth, each with humanity developing differently. Some worlds where we never invented writing, others where we achieved spaceflight in ancient Egypt. Timelines where consciousness evolved through cybernetics, through biological manipulation, through pure meditation. Each one created, studied, and thrown away. "My God," I breathed. "They're using our entire species as a laboratory." The triangle being, the rogue leader, came back together near the black sphere future Adam had pointed out as the temporal anchor. Its communication hit us all at the same time. "You understand so little. We seek the best path for consciousness evolution. Every timeline we create provides data. Every variation teaches us about the nature of awareness itself. When we find the perfect sequence, we will go beyond even our current forms." "By murdering billions of potential beings," I shot back, firing my disruptor at a nearby console. The weapon's discharge carved through equipment that existed in 7 dimensions at once. Not murder, experimentation. You would do the same if you understood the prize. Evolution beyond the limits of linear time. To exist in all moments at the same time. To experience every possible version of consciousness at once. Future Adam's shape blinked as he blocked another attack. They want to absorb the collective experiences of all possible human futures. To become beings of pure knowledge, existing across every timeline. The third being, the one made of angles, joined the battle directly. It hit our temporal shield, and Sarah's stabilizer made a loud noise in protest. Sparks flew from the device as she fought to maintain our bubble of normal space-time. "I can't hold this much longer," she warned. That's when future Adam made his choice. He pulled his energy form together, condensing from a protective shield into something more focused, more intense. The light he generated became almost solid, and I realized what he was about to do. "Adam, no. This is the only way," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air vibrate. "Their temporal apparatus requires massive energy to maintain. If I destabilize it, you'll burn yourself out completely," Sarah finished, understanding the physics faster than the rest of us. "You won't just dissolve, you'll cease to exist across all timelines." Future Adam's shape pulsed with something like a smile. "I died once to preserve the timeline. I can do it again." He moved before any of us could object, flowing toward the massive crystal structure at the chamber's heart. The rogue beings realized his intent and came at him, their attacks becoming desperate. But future Adam had put everything into this final action. He hit the time machine like a living bomb. The explosion wasn't just light and sound, it was time itself coming apart. Past, present, and future crashed together in a wave of impossible colors. I watched the crystal structure crack, breaks spreading through dimensions I couldn't name. The geometric beings screamed in sounds that broke equipment throughout the chamber, their perfect shapes twisting as their experiments fell apart. "Move!" Robert bellowed. "Everyone out, now!" But I couldn't look away from future Adam. His energy form was burning from the inside out, consuming itself to power the apparatus's destruction. Through the bright light, I saw him looking at me one last time. "Remember," he said, though his voice was already fading, "the future isn't fixed, it's chosen." Then he was gone. Not disappeared, not dissolved, gone in a way that left an empty space in reality itself. The rogue beings were screaming now, their geometric shapes losing structure as their base fell apart around them. The triangle leader struck out wildly, but its attacks had no focus. The careful control that let them manipulate time was breaking along with their equipment. David grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. "We need to go. The whole place is coming down." The hallway we'd entered through was twisting, walls flowing like water as the facility's impossible architecture failed. We ran through passages that changed direction with each step, past rooms that existed in different centuries at the same time. Behind us, the destruction spread like a virus through the structure's timeline. Sarah stumbled, her equipment slowing her down. Robert and I grabbed her arms, half carrying her through a doorway that tried to become a window halfway through our passage. The geometric being's screams followed us, but growing weaker, more distant. "There!" David pointed to a rectangle of normal daylight ahead, the entrance we'd come through still somehow stable. We burst out into Nevada sunlight just as the final collapse began. The pyramid structure folded in on itself, each surface trying to exist in a different moment. The geometric beings were caught in the implosion, their evolved forms unable to maintain coherence without their technological anchors. I turned back to see the rogue leader making one last attempt to escape, but the temporal vortex future Adam had created was too strong. The triangle being stretched across multiple timelines, its consciousness scattered through 1,000 different moments before being pulled into the collapsing void. The vortex sealed with a sound like existence itself, sighing in relief. Where the impossible pyramid had stood, only disturbed sand remained. No trace of the structure, the rogue faction, or future Adam's sacrifice. Even the fused glass from their experiments was gone, erased along with everything else. We stood in the desert silence, four battered humans trying to process what we'd just survived. My clothes were singed, my ears still ringing from harmonics that shouldn't exist. Sarah's equipment was fried, David's tactical gear was torn, and Robert had a cut on his forehead that bled normal red blood. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, her voice small. I looked at the empty space where future Adam had made his final stand. The timeline felt stable, solid in a way it hadn't since the rogue faction began their experiments. Whatever damage they'd done, Adam's sacrifice had fixed it. "Yeah," I said. "It's over." We helped each other back to the vehicles, moving like people waking from a dream. Or a nightmare. The Humvees started normally, their temporal shielding flickering once before, shutting down permanently. We wouldn't need it anymore. The drive back to Area 51 passed in exhausted silence, each of us processing the impossible in our own way. We'd faced beings evolved beyond human comprehension, fought a battle across multiple dimensions, and watched a friend sacrifice his existence to save timelines we'd never see. As the familiar buildings of Area 51 came into view, I found myself thinking about future Adam's final words. The future wasn't fixed, it was chosen. Every day, in every decision, humanity was choosing its path forward. The rogue faction had tried to force that choice, to find a shortcut to transcendence by experimenting on consciousness itself. But maybe the journey mattered as much as the destination. Maybe humanity needed to make its mistakes, suffer its catastrophes, and find its own way to evolution. We pulled into the motor pool as the sun began setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Normal colors, following normal physics, in a world that would continue its normal path through time. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The dust hadn't even settled where the pyramid had been, and already my hands were shaking. Not from fear or adrenaline. Those had burned out somewhere between watching future Adam sacrifice himself and stumbling back to the Humvees. No, this was something else. Something heavier. I stood 20 feet from the vehicles, staring at the leather-bound journal in my hands. Future Adam had pressed it into my grip during those final moments in the collapsing facility, his energy form blinking as he transferred it directly into my possession. A duplicate of the original, he'd said, but more than that. Enhanced. Expanded. Complete. Behind me, I heard Robert organizing our leaving. His voice carried that same commanding tone I'd known for decades. But something was off. The urgency was wrong. Too casual for someone who'd just fought beings from the year 50,000. "Thompson, check the vehicles for damage. Williams, pack up any salvageable equipment. Anderson, you coming?" I turned to see my team moving with practiced efficiency, but their faces showed only normal exhaustion. No shell-shocked expressions, no thousand-yard stares from witnessing impossible geometries and temporal warfare. They looked like they'd just finished a difficult but conventional field exercise. "Yeah," I called back. "Give me a minute." Sarah looked up from her equipment case, and for a moment, I thought I saw recognition in her eyes. Then she blinked, and it was gone. She returned to packing with the same careful movements she'd use after any mission. The realization hit me hard. They didn't remember any of it. I looked down at the journal again, running my thumb across its worn leather cover. Future Adam's final gift came with a price. Not just his existence, but my isolation. He'd protected them from the memory of what we'd faced, keeping their minds safe from paradoxes that could have driven them mad. But he'd left me aware, alone with the truth. The drive back to Area 51 confirmed my suspicions. Robert complained about the wild goose chase we'd been sent on, grumbling about brass making them check out power changes that turned out to be nothing. David mentioned something about desert mirages playing tricks on the instruments. Sarah had a theory about electromagnetic problems causing false readings. None of them remembered the geometric beings, the impossible architecture, future Adam's sacrifice. I sat in the back of the Humvee, the journal hidden inside my jacket, and played along, nodded at the right moments, agreed that headquarters had wasted our time, all while feeling 13,000 years of future history pressing against my ribs. Back at base, I filed my report in Robert's office while he poured himself coffee from a pot that had probably been brewing since morning. The familiar bitter smell brought me back to the present moment. "So, what do you think caused those power readings?" he asked, settling behind his desk. I kept my voice steady. "Solar flares, maybe. Sarah mentioned the magnetic interference was consistent with increased solar activity." Robert scanned my report. 2 pages of technical nonsense about atmospheric distortions and equipment malfunctions. Well, at least we got Thompson and Williams back for a reunion. Been too long since the old team worked together. Yeah, like old times. He signed off on the report without another question. Why would he? As far as Robert Miller knew, we'd driven into the desert, found nothing, and driven back. A waste of fuel and man-hours. Nothing more. I went back to my room and locked the door. Only then did I let myself really look at future Adam's journal. The original entries were all there. Adam's careful notes about humanity's future, the climate wars, the changes to our species. But mixed throughout were new parts, written in energy rather than ink, only visible when I turned the pages toward light. Future Adam's additions weren't predictions or warnings. They were explanations, background for what I'd seen, details about the rogue group's experiments and how they failed, proof that the timeline had been fixed, that humanity's path forward stayed the same even after their interference. And on the last page, a message just for me. "Michael, you're the only one who knows now. The others can't remember without risking problems. You have to decide what to do with this information. The timeline is stable, but fragile. One word to the wrong person, one secret told too soon, and everything Adam saw could fall apart. Choose carefully. The future depends on it." I spent the next 3 weeks barely sleeping. The journal sat on my desk like a loaded weapon, its pages holding information that could reshape human civilization. Every morning I'd look at it over coffee, running through the same arguments. If I told world leaders about Adam's predictions, how many lives could be saved? The climate disasters he'd written about were decades away, but already building. The resource wars could be stopped with proper planning. The pandemics could be prevented before they started. But then I'd remember Adam's own words from that first questioning years ago. Humanity had to learn through suffering. The hard lessons couldn't be taught, only lived through. And worse, what if my interference created new problems? What if stopping one disaster caused 3 others? Sarah knocked on my door one afternoon, holding a tablet with air readings. "Michael, I wanted to thank you for recommending me for the desert operation. Even if it was a bust, it was good to work with the team again." I forced a smile. "Anytime." She paused at the doorway. "Are you okay? You've seemed distant lately." "Just tired. That desert heat takes more out of me than it used to." "Tell me about it. I keep having strange dreams about that day. Probably just my brain trying to make sense of the magnetic anomalies." She shook her head. "Anyway, if you need to talk..." "Thanks, Sarah. I'm fine." After she left, I sat back down with the journal. Sarah's mind was trying to process memories that had been hidden, not erased. Future Adam's protection was already showing cracks. How long before one of them remembered? And what would that do to them? That night, I made my decision. I drove out to the archive vault at 0300 hours, when the facility was at minimum staffing. The security officer barely looked up from his magazine as I badged in. Just Anderson pulling another late night with classified documents. Nothing unusual. The vault, where I'd stored Adam's original journal, still buzzed with climate control systems. I placed Future Adam's duplicate next to it on the shelf, 2 volumes of impossible history side by side. Humanity would face its test without knowing what was coming. The climate wars would come. Billions would die. But from that suffering, Adam's people would eventually emerge. Peaceful, united, evolved. I locked the vault and pocketed the key. The walk back through Area 51's corridors felt different this time. I wasn't carrying the burden anymore. I was leaving it for future generations to discover when they were ready. Maybe in 100 years. Maybe 1,000. Whenever humanity had grown enough to handle the truth without destroying themselves with it. I filed an addendum to my mission report the next morning, noting that all equipment had been accounted for and no problems requiring further investigation had been found. Robert signed it without comment. The official record would show nothing unusual had happened in the Nevada desert. Just another false alarm in a career full of them. Years passed. I retired from Area 51, moved to a small house in Colorado, where I could see mountains instead of desert. Robert passed away first, heart attack while fly fishing in Montana, exactly the way he would have wanted to go. David disappeared into the private sector and stopped returning calls. Sarah won a Nobel Prize for her work on quantum field dynamics, never knowing how close she'd come to the real thing. I watched the news with grim interest as Adam's predictions came true. The first Category 6 hurricane, the water riots in California, the pandemic that started in exactly the city he'd named, spreading along the exact paths he'd described. Each disaster arriving on schedule, humanity stumbling toward its destiny one disaster at a time. Sometimes I'd wake at night, wondering if I'd made the right choice. All those lives that could have been saved. All that suffering that could have been prevented. But then I'd remember future Adam's sacrifice, how he died twice to preserve the timeline. Who was I to undo his work with good intentions? On my 90th birthday, alone except for a nurse who came by twice a week, I watched a news report about the first successful fusion reactor coming online. Right on schedule, according to Adam's journal. Humanity taking its first real step toward the unlimited energy that would someday power floating cities and consciousness transfer networks. They'd make it. Through everything. Or perhaps because of everything. They'd survive and grow and become something wonderful. Adam's people were out there in the future, waiting to be born from humanity's long struggle toward transcendence. I closed my eyes and saw future Adam one last time, his energy body blazing as he destroyed himself to save timelines I'd never see. He'd trusted me with the knowledge, trusted me to make the hard choice. The future wasn't fixed, it was chosen, and I'd chosen to let humanity choose it for themselves.